Welcome to the Victor Emmanuel Nature Tours webinar. I am Ben Reynolds, host and organizer of the Vent webinar series. Thank you for joining us today. We are delighted to offer this educational presentation, and we hope you enjoy today's topic on Spotting Scopes 101. Let's welcome our main presenter, Clay Taylor from Swarovski Optik. During this session, all attendees may ask questions. If you have questions relating to a certain topic or a slide on the screen, I will try to retrieve and deliver it to Clay in real time. Otherwise, there will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. However, if you have technical questions during our session, I'll try my best to address them in real time to help you have the best viewing experience. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on demand anytime at your convenience on our Victor Emmanuel Nature Tours YouTube channel. A link to the recording, along with a special discount offer, will be delivered to you in an email tomorrow afternoon. Now, back to our feature presentation. I would like to introduce you all to Clay. Clay Taylor grew up in Connecticut and started photography in 1970. And once he had purchased his first 500mm lens, he aimed it at the birds in his backyard. That led to a passion for birding and eventually leading birding tours across the US and Canada. In 1999, he became the birder at Swarovski Optik North America, attending bird festivals, leading bird walks, and still taking lots of bird photos. In 2008, he moved to South Texas in order to get away from winter, and replaced his Connecticut backyard blue jays with Texas green jays. Now that smartphone cameras and digital SLR cameras can work wonderfully through a spotting scope, the challenges and enjoyment of birding and bird photography are as fresh as they ever were. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We're thrilled to have Clay present on spotting scopes. We hope you enjoy the presentation. Without further ado, we will turn to Clay.
Thank you, Ben. Hello, everybody. Wherever you are, welcome to me in South Texas, although we're not going to see South Texas this morning. I'm looking out my office window at my water feature, so if I all of a sudden get distracted and go, ooh, that means I've got a warbler or something coming taking a bath. Anyway, hopefully you should see on your screen the Spotting Scopes 101 slide, and then also me. And Ben and I were playing with this yesterday. So what I would like to have is my picture and the Spotting Scopes 101 picture about the same size. So if you take your mouse and bring it up onto that line and maybe drag it down a little bit, you should be able to equalize the size of the photos, because I'm going to be doing a lot of waving things around like John Madden, in addition to letting you look at still dumb, non-interesting slides. Well, not interesting slides.
That's right, exactly. So just to point out, Clay, to the audience, that there are the three lines in the middle between you and the PowerPoint slide. And if they click on that, they can drag it down and adjust the size of those two images.
Right. So right now on my screen, I'm seeing me. My image is exactly the same size as the Spotting Scopes 101 slide. So Ben will be remotely forwarding the slides, so I'll do the little annoying, next slide please type thing. But so Spotting Scopes 101, this is beginning spotting scopes. If you guys really think this is cool and you want to have more in-depth stuff on spotting scopes, and especially the photography, which we'll talk about toward the end, let the guys at Victor Emmanuel Nature Tours know, and maybe we can do a more complete, more in-depth photography with spotting scopes event sometime in the future. So next slide, please, Ben. Title slide: Spotting versus astroscopes. Oh, this is the some of the categories we're going to be covering. The numbers, body types, tripods, how to choose, and question and answer. So next. So here we are, Spotting Scopes 101. There's me down in Corpus Christi looking for stuff, either in the back in Oasis Bay or down on the beach at Mustang Island. And in the middle is one of my favorite pictures ever, taken at South Padre Island. If you've been to the convention center at South Padre, you know that every day the sun sets across the Laguna Madre and hopefully you can get some really cool silhouetted shots of birds. And here I have white pelicans and brown pelicans and a big old sunset. And this picture has been used in a number of places, including the Seabirds book by Cameron Cox and Ken Behrens. So anyway, okay, spotting scopes 101. What's a spotting scope? Next slide. So people are familiar with telescopes and they think astronomy. Basically, an astronomy telescope and a spotting telescope are the same thing. They will magnify things a lot greater than your binocular will. I mean, typically with a binocular, you're talking 8 power, 10 power, maybe 12 or 15 power, and any more than that, and it's too hard to hold them steady. So a spotting, any telescope, we'll just call generic telescope, will give you big magnifications. With an astronomy telescope, you're looking at stars, you're looking at the moon, you're looking at stuff. What you don't realize is that an astronomy telescope takes an image that is right side up and turns it upside down and sometimes makes it backwards. So for looking at things on land, that can get really interesting because you find a bird and he's upside down. Well, that's kind of hard to see details on him. You can buy a prism that will make him flip back up called an erecting prism, but he may still be backwards, meaning if the bird is walking left to right, in the view of your scope, he's actually walking right to left. So it can get really annoying. Years ago, the holy grail of spotting scopes for birders was the old Questar telescope, and you had to get the erecting prism, but they didn't have a reversing prism, so the birds were always backwards and walked the wrong way, which was really annoying. Even though it was a great image, it was really annoying. So a spotting scope is made to look at stuff terrestrially on the ground. So it's made for birds, it's made for butterflies, it's made for boats, airplanes, next door neighbors, whatever you want to look at. You're going to look at it with a spotting scope because the image is right side up and it's correct. You can read the writing. If it's going left to right in your viewfinder, it's when you look up, it's going left to right in real life. So spotting scope is correct for viewing on the land. And that's pretty much it, because otherwise the optical systems are pretty much the same. So next slide. Spotting scope versus astroscope. Okay, both scope types have the same basic elements. What's always important is the size of your front lens, the objective lens, like we talked about back in the day with back in the other seminar we did on binoculars. The bigger the front opening, the more light goes in, the brighter the subject's going to be. Also, the bigger the front opening, the more detail it's going to be. So if I have my 65 scope here and my 95 scope here, both set at 30 power, looking at the same bird, the 95 scope being another 50% larger in opening will give me 50% more sharpness than the 65 will, even though they're exactly the same size bird. So that's a very good thing. Bad thing is bigger, heavier scope because you have more glass, a larger scope to carry and all that stuff. So it depends on your needs in the field, which size scope you're going to get. Same thing with the astronomy telescopes. The really big astronomy telescopes, I mean, you can get them 6-inch, 8-inch, 10-inch, 24-inch, 36-inch telescopes. They're huge. They gather a lot of light, but more importantly, they give you more detail. So that's why those guys have those huge scopes, not as much for the maximum magnification, but for the detail they see with them. All scopes have some sort of an eyepiece. So in the case of this one, it's an interchangeable eyepiece. All astronomy telescopes have an interchangeable eyepiece. And quite honestly, the optics people know that the most important part of the telescope is not the objective lens, it's how good the eyepiece is. Because you can go over in the astronomy world, you can have a guy that spends $4,000 on his telescope, which is pretty cool. And if he really gets into it, he'll spend $6,000 or $7,000 on his various eyepieces because they're what make the entire image really go. With birding and spotting scopes, we're less varied in our choices of eyepieces, mostly because, well, when I started back in the 70s, all the really good birders had scopes, the old Bausch & Lomb Bal scopes, things like that, with a fixed power eyepiece. They had a 20 power, they had a 30 power, they may have had a 45 power or a 60 power, and they had to change them because back in the day, the zoom eyepieces were not really good optically. Sharpness wise, they were okay in the centers, pretty bad on the edges. And as you zoomed them, everything got really bad really quickly. Just as an aside, so when I was birding, and like Ben said, I started out birding with a camera. My first purchase for a birding equipment was actually a spotting scope. And here it is. Here's my old Bushnell Space Master from 1977, late 76, early 77. You can see that the focusing wheel cracked and fell off, which it did on all the Space Masters. It's got some pretty major dings and bumps in it because it went, on its nose on the pavement more than once. It's a great old scope, but what really made this thing cool was it had a little 20 to 45 power zoom eyepiece that was wicked sharp. And other birders would look through my little zoom eyepiece and go, holy cow, that is really good image. I said, I have no idea how I got it, but I got a really nice one, because even the rings of Saturn and the great spot in Jupiter were really easy to see. So I got a good eyepiece. There were some other ones out there that were not particularly good. So still, even into the 1990s, a lot of people that were birders, that were really serious birders, were doing a 30 power wide angle eyepiece or something like that. But Swarovski Optik has always been pushing a really good design on their zoom eyepiece. And now we don't even make fixed power eyepieces anymore, because this is our 25 to 50 wide field zoom. It's as wide as all of those wide angle eyepieces were, and it is really sharp. And the great thing is you can change your power without having to pull an eyepiece off, reach in your pocket and pull another eyepiece on there. So we did make some fixed power eyepieces, but we stopped making those well over a decade ago. And again, for birding, you want to have a wide field, lower power to be able to scan and find stuff. And then you say, ooh, what is that bird? You want to be able to zoom it up and get a better look at it. And we'll get into the ramifications of that coming up. Photography is always possible through any kind of a scope, because as long as your eyeball can see through it, your camera can see through it. We'll get into that, and especially using cell phones a little later in the event here. So next slide, please. Okay, the big difference between an astroscope and a spotting scope, outside of the image upside down thing, is astronomy scopes are not designed to be moved around a lot. They're complicated to set up because you have to align them to the stars, so that way when the star motion goes, they can track with them. They're also not waterproof, because why would you be going out looking for stars on a rainy night? You're not going to, so they don't make astroscopes waterproof. Spotting scopes, that's a whole nother deal, because we're going out birding in sunny days, we're going out birding in crappy days, we're going out in the middle of winter. If you live up north on the Christmas counts and it's 7 degrees and snowing or sleeting, and it's nice to have a scope that can take a beating. So most of the really good spotting scopes are waterproof. They have some kind of rugged rubber armoring, say that fast 5 times, or you can get Cordura protective cases to go on them. One of the bigger differences in physical between the astronomy scopes and the spotting scopes is the astronomy scopes are usually very long, because it's a clean optical path. There are no prisms in there. We actually use prisms in here, just like a binocular does, to fold up the light path inside here, shorten the size of the scope, because you don't want to be carrying around the field something that's really big. You want something that's compact. So we do have prisms. Even my old Space Master has prisms, which is why the profile here is not straight through. When I go to a place where there's a lot of photographers around and I've got my camera on my scope, they look at it and go, what's wrong with this? And I say, well, then I take the camera off and they go, oh, we'll get to that. The better models are completely waterproof and rugged. I already said that. When transported on a tripod, you can set up and quickly view stuff. So you can throw the tripod over your shoulder, walk around, find birds, and do all that. We'll talk about tripods coming up. And the correct image certainly makes photography a lot easier too, in addition to viewing things. So next slide. Okay, back when we talked about binoculars, we said that there were numbers. This is a 10 by 32 EL. The same numbering convention goes with the spotting scopes. The first number is always the size of the front opening, how big it is, and the second number is the magnification. But since in this case we have a spotting scope with a zoom eyepiece, we have something a little bit different. So this is I've got them backwards here, but 20 to 60 power by 65 millimeter scope. Behind me, well, I've got the 115 here somewhere, but this is the 95 millimeter that is in fact 30 to 70. So always remember the objective number is how big, how bright the image is. The first number, the power, is how big it makes it. So 25 to 60 with my little scope here. Actually, this is 25 to 50. Come think of it. 25 to 50 is my magnification range. 65 is my front opening size, and you can kind of size them up and compare them that way. Ultimately, the 65 scopes are small and lightweight compared to the big boys, but they don't give you as bright a picture, they don't give you as sharp a picture. So there's your choice and your challenge for if you really want really great images, you're going to have to put up with a scope that's a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, a little bit bulkier to travel around with, but the image will be wow. So there we go. Next slide. So botting types. If you've been birding for a long time, and back in the 70s, all the spotting scopes that we saw were a straight through eyepiece. There was one that was long and straight, completely straight through without the kink, like the old Bausch & Lomb Bal scopes. It looked like a big old baseball bat. That was actually using a roof prism inside. But virtually all the spotting scopes back in the day were straight through eyepieces. And then the British birders discovered that, hey, you know something, this angled eyepiece thing actually works pretty well in the field. And it's harder to initially learn, harder to initially learn how to aim at stuff because you're not looking down the middle of it. But the advantages of looking down into an eyepiece are tremendous. So when I got the Swarovski Optik back in 1999, on the birding side, we were probably selling maybe 2/3 of our scopes were angled and the rest were straight. Over on the hunting side of our company, it was like 97% of the scopes were straight through and very few were angled. In the ensuing years, we figured out that angle gives you a lot of benefits. Number one, birders tend to travel in flocks, and I do mean that as a pun. And when you get a group of birders, invariably you've got George, who's 6'7", and Mary, who's 5'2", and a few others in between. So if I'm trying to set up my scope with a straight through eyepiece, George has either got to hunch way down or Mary's got to get up on her tiptoes, and it's quite annoying. Whereas with the angled eyepiece, all George has to do is bend over at the waist to look through it, and you can set up the scope so it's nicely set up the tripod height so Mary can look through it nicely. The other real cool advantage about the angle scope is you got a group of birders and you've got a precocious 9-year-old who's really into birds, but he or she is like 4'7". You can actually do this. You can unlock a little thingy and turn the eyepiece this way, or even make it go down so they can look up into it. And I've got my balance rail in the way, so you can flip it so the eyepiece is facing completely down. So that's a very cool feature. And most all the good angled eyepiece spotting scopes should do this. Big advantage of having your tripod set lower is the lower your legs are, the more stable everything is, which is a good thing. Also down out of the wind and all that. So like I say, right now in our industry, we're selling probably 98% of our scopes, hunting or birding, are angled and a few are straight through. Now, the advantages of straight through, there are a few. If you're in your car, driving the wildlife drive at Laguna Atascosa Wildlife Refuge or Brigantine Wildlife Refuge or Ottawa National Wildlife Refuge up in Ohio, coming up in a couple of weeks for birding. Having a straight through scope in a car window mount, that's a really cool thing. Having the angle scope on the window mount, you got to figure out how to angle it to get through it. It gets to be a little annoying. But so there's advantages to doing the straight through, also for the photography, which I'll get to in a second. The tricky part about all this was with the traditional style of spotting scope, where you have interchangeable eyepieces. Basically, you're buying a body and then adding an eyepiece to it. And depending on the manufacturer, what different eyepieces they have available is cool. But here I'm choosing a 65 and I'm choosing an angled eyepiece. And if I want all of a sudden to get a straight through, I've got to go buy another scope. Or if I want to get a bigger front opening, I've got to go buy another scope because I'm kind of limited there. Let's see. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so choosing a scope for you. So now I'm going to circle back to, size and weight is usually, for most birders, size and weight is the most important factor. I will state right out front that, you know, whatever size scope you get, expect to be putting it on a tripod. You know, if you're not, you're just kind of going to be fooling yourself that you're going to get the maximum out of that scope. There's people that do those shoulder stocks and put their scopes on there with a straight through eyepiece. They must be really, really good, much better than me, because I can hold one of those and look at fine birds, but I can't see fine detail, and I can't tell whether that's a Baird sandpiper or a white rump sandpiper when this thing is floating around like crazy on me. So expect to be able to do a tripod. We'll talk about tripods coming up. So in most cases, the scope sizes are going to be either 60 or 65 millimeter, jumping up to something in the 80 or 85 millimeter range, and then the big boys. The British came into, about a decade and a half ago now, at least 15 years, yeah. They started using little bitty mini scopes, little bitty 50 millimeter front openings and little tiny scopes, only because they were easy to travel with. But if you're spending all kinds of money to go to Africa or Costa Rica or Australia to go see stuff, bringing a little dinky scope is probably not going to give you the kind of images that you wanted to see, given, you know, stuff. So the little mini scopes are a niche for sure. They're starting to get some pretty good ones, and the prices have come up accordingly. But you're still limited by the amount of light it gathers, the amount of sharpness it's going to give you, and it's offset by small size and weight. So if you're traveling and you just can't bring a 65 scope and a full-size tripod, but you can bring a little mini tripod and a little mini scope, I guess that works. You're gonna have to make that decision yourself. So with the 65, smallest and lightest, best for travel. The 80 or 85 millimeter scope, that's the jack of all trades, master of none. It gives you more light in, it gives you more detail. It's bigger and heavier, but it's not nearly the brightness, the detail, the sharpness of like our 95 millimeter scope or our brand new big boy, which I'll show you in a minute. So you can see the little picture down in the corner there. We'll talk about the modular scope coming up. The modular, when we do the modular scope, the neat thing is, not only with this scope, if I want to travel with it, the only way I can make it smaller is just take the eyepiece off. With this scope, when I want to travel with it, I can do this. And they can literally go in a pocket. So next slide, and we'll talk about the modulars. There we go. Okay. So let's see, we started out with the old gray AT80, ST80 scopes back in the 1980s. And in 2002, we upgraded to the green ATS, STS scopes, also with a new eyepiece and new shape and rubber armoring versus the gray paint that chipped off and all that stuff. So from 2002 for the next 10 years or so, this was our scope, and it was a wonderful scope. This is a really cool story because people are always asking us, what's next for you? What next are you coming out with? And so the designers at Swarovski were looking probably about 2006, 2007, 2008. Okay, what scope are we going to have to replace our current systems? And so they went to the optical designers and said, how do we get a better image? And the optical designers said, okay, here's one of the inherent problems we have with this interchangeable lens system. You have you have a mount, and you have a receiver here. Now we've got there's glass and sealing inside, so this scope is still waterproof even with the eyepiece off. But having all this stuff is keeping the lenses of the eyepiece farther away from the prisms. And if we can get those lenses closer to the prisms, we as optical designers, we can do more cool stuff. But we have to get away from this whole interchangeable eyepiece thing. So the challenge was, all right, what do we do to move the eyepiece closer to the prisms, yet still maintain integrity, waterproofness, ruggedness, and all that stuff? So they came up with the idea of the modular scope system. So let me pop this baby back on here. And what that was, there we go. We came up with the ability to disassemble what we're calling the observing module and the objective module. So inside here is my zoom eyepieces, my zooming eyepiece deal. also my prisms, and the zooming is done by this little control up front. And over here on the objective side, it's just that. It's an objective lens. There we go. And I have a focusing wheel, and that's it. So it's pretty simple. When I combine the two, this was the first kind of breakthrough that they did. So now all of a sudden, instead of having to focus up front with my old scope, focus up front here, and then zoom back here, now all of a sudden the controls are right here together. This is kind of cool because now your hand's not fumbling around looking for things. If you're focusing on the fly or you want to change your zoom, boom, it goes. All right, so that's cool. So what happens was they moved the lenses in closer to the prism. They actually made them one solid complete unit. So we can't separate those out anymore. But what that gave us the ability to do was get a little better zoom range. This is 25 to 60, but it's also a bigger field of view, much bigger field of view, which is how big that circle you see is, and also still give really good eye relief for eyeglass wearers. Now for me, these are only reading glasses. I don't use them for out in the field, but I found out something very interesting. We had a customer that was doing astronomy and was having an issue with his eyepiece and stuff. He said he was seeing the star points weren't points, they were the little sparkles. So I went out and looked through my scope normally, and yeah, my stars were little sparkles too. And I went, well, wait a minute. My eye doctor says that even though I only need these for reading, I do have a little bit of astigmatism. So when I put my glasses on and look through the eyepiece, all of a sudden those stars were now points again. So if you do wear glasses and you have an astigmatism, it is always going to be better optically to wear your glasses, play with the eye cup, roll the eye cup in, and use that, because probably for birds I wouldn't see a difference, but definitely for doing astronomy, it made a clear difference, which was kind of an eye opener, no pun intended. So we have the angled. Oops, where's angled? Angled. We have the oops. No, I'm getting out. Oh, the angle's behind me. That's right. There it is. So we have the angled eyepiece. We have the straight through eyepiece. And then a couple years ago, we came out with something that's really cool. A binocular objective ocular module, observing module. So this baby is, just like the other ones, it is detachable. You can do it. So now, the binocular, the BTX, they call the BTX, is not for everybody because it's big and heavy. Boy, is it bulky, and it adds a lot of tail heaviness. But the ability to look through a spotting scope with both eyes is absolutely amazing, because what happens is your brain and your eyes are photoshopped. And there's a long involved paper on the internet that you can go read. It's many pages, but the bottom line is when both eyes are looking through the same scope, even if it's the same, just a single front opening, your brain will multiply and add stuff together. It enhances contrast, it enhances details. You can see more with both eyes through the same scope at the same power than you can with one eye, which is very cool. And for doing things like sea watches, fantastic. Shorebirds on mudflats, unbelievable. Even if you're in your backyard and looking, you got a hummingbird nest in your backyard or a robin nest or whatever, and it's 30-40 feet away. Looking through here, you see everything, and you actually do get depth perception because even your eyes look, even though it's coming through a single lens, there's a slight different parallax of the two prisms, so you can get depth perception, which is very cool. And the way you can tell that is if you look through the scope at something and something is behind it, as you move your head back and forth, it actually looks like the back one is moving while the front one is not, and changing orientation is the definition of depth perception. So that's very cool. So we started with the 65 millimeter, the 80 millimeter, the 95 millimeter, the ATX and the STX. We added the BTX a couple years ago, which is fantastic. And then just this past year, we introduced something that I honestly never thought I would see. So here's my 65. Ooh, boy. Here's the big boy. This is the 115 millimeter front opening. It is huge. It is heavy. But the image is just unbelievable. As great as the 95 was. And so we came out with the modular scope system in 2012. So I can't believe it's almost 10 years now. And from day one, the 95 was the best seller because all the hunters and all the birders that wanted to do long distance just said, this is killer good. It's sharp, it's bright. I'll put up with the weight. It has been the best seller ever since we introduced it 9 years ago. We introduced this baby last summer, started shipping it, and the demand has been off the hook. We cannot make these fast enough. If you were to order one from Land, Sea, and Sky right now, you're probably waiting 3 to 4 months. And I'll give you the straight scoop here. It absolutely kills Swarovski Optik in Austria to not be able to supply what's needed when it's needed. We pride ourselves in being able to monitor the market and being able to deliver stuff when necessary. The demand for this thing is incredible. It is also the single most precise, finicky, difficult to maintain tolerances product that we've ever made. And one of our technical guys, sales guys back in Austria said, yeah, now we get an idea why no other companies are making a lens this big in serial production and a lot of production. But it is fantastic. I love it to death. And I got mine. So that's one of the perks of working for the company. All right, so where do you go with this? We've had a lot of customers who have bought the 65 just because of the size and the weight, which is very cool. We had a husband and wife a few years ago at Biggest Week in Birding. They came in. We had the big optics tent with all of us optics guys there, all the scopes. They spent 3 days on and off after they were birding the boardwalk, coming back and looking at different scopes, taking our scopes out and some of the other guys' scopes out, the big ones, the little ones, and all that. And they wanted to make the informed consumer decision, which is perfect because that's exactly why we're there. At the end of it, they said, okay, we're going with the 65 and the angled eyepiece. Perfect. It was size and weight for them. She could take it out with them and all that stuff. So the next year, we opened the tent at Biggest Week in Birding. They come walking in. Hey, how you doing? How you liking the scope? Oh my God, we love the scope. We're having so much fun with it. We're going to go to Denali in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and we want to buy the 95 front, because that's the cool thing about the modular system. You can buy pieces and parts and assemble them as you go. So initially with them, the angled 65 was exactly what they wanted. Here it is. All right, and for them that was perfect. He was tall, she was medium height. They're going to go to Denali. They want to see grizzly bears at 2 miles off and Jaegers and stuff like that. So they wanted to buy the 95 and take them both. If we're going to hike, we'll take the little guy. If we're going to sit and scan, we're going to use the 95. Perfect. We have had customers who have bought the angle scope, loved it to death, have got into photography and decided, well, okay, photography is more than just a passing thing. I'm doing more photography than just taking a picture of something to prove I saw it. You know, I want to do, because we can do this with it. I'll get into that in a bit. But so you can buy the straight through eyepiece and be able to say, okay, today we're going out to take pictures of the ospreys bringing food to the babies at the nest. We're going to go with the straight through because I can put my camera on there. Now it aims just like a regular camera lens and I can do that stuff. Photography, there is no photographic difference through this scope, whether you got the angle or the straight eyepiece. Probably if you had it in some optical laboratory and really looked at the performance, there is a difference. But for visually viewing and for photography, no difference whatsoever. So you can go that way with it. I usually say so buy the module system that will work better for you. And to go back to our poor little ATS 65, you know, comparing the ATS 65 and the ATX 65, they're just a whole different level of performance. That whole the thing of moving the prisms, moving the lenses closer to the prism and all that stuff just gave a dramatically better picture to these two. So while this was a wonderful little scope, it is, and it's still in the product line because it's a good price point. It's $2,200. And to give you a specific point on that, about 4 years ago, Victor Emanuel called me up. You know, I'm in Corpus Christi. He's up in Austin. They say, hey, Clay, you know, and Barry called me and said, you know, we want to buy scopes for our leaders. We want to see what you've got. So I came up to Hornsby Bend and we played around with all the different scopes. Victor ended up buying a bunch of the 65 angled ATS scopes. mostly because he ended up spending about $50,000 on scopes for his guys, which is a really cool thing to do. And it would have been a bunch more expensive if he'd have done, probably 30% more expensive if he'd have done the ATXs. I totally get it. Barry called me up a couple years later and said, hey, Clay, all those scopes we've got going all over the world, in all kinds of conditions, you know what the failure rate is on them? I said, no, I don't. He said, we haven't had a single problem with any of them. I said, perfect. The neat thing is, though, if you do have problems with it, our repair department is in Rhode Island. You do not have to send it back to Austria. Any other Swarovski Optik user anywhere in the world, whether it's Africa, South America, Australia, their repairs have to go back to Austria. Ours go back to us in Rhode Island, where we do virtually all the repairs right there. So, okay, next slide. So there's the 65 and the 95. So that customer, the husband and wife team, that's what they took to Denali. We saw them again the next year at Biggest Week in Birding, and they said, oh my God, the 95 was so good. We're so glad we bought it and took it to Denali. So it's like, cool. You can see there we've got a point and shoot camera rig on the scope. That was the cool way to go, and it's kind of fallen, well, as point and shoot cameras have kind of dropped off the radar. So is that. We'll talk about that when we get into photography. How are we doing? So we're 35 minutes into the deal. I think we're in good shape. Next slide. So I mentioned that since we have power, since we're starting, most scopes are starting at 20 power. There's some that are 15. There was a 15 to 45 somebody else made. It was a pretty good scope. But at those magnifications, 20 power, 30 power, 40 power, 50 power, whatever it is, you're gonna need some way to keep it steady. Nobody is steady enough to just hold the scope by itself. And like I say, I've tried those shoulder stocks, and I just can't get it stable enough to where I can do the viewing that I want to do to see whether that's a Baird sandpiper or a white rump sandpiper, or to look for. I mean, we literally had a Chuck Will's widow perched here in Corpus Christi the other day, and we were looking at the whiskers. The rictal bristles on a Chuck Will's widow actually have branches coming off the bristles themselves, whereas whippoorwill does not. So we're actually seeing that with the scope, and that's a very cool thing. So you need a tripod. No, it's not here, but I went through a series of tripods back in the 70s and 80s. All aluminum tripods, all fairly junky. You got to remember, the tripod manufacturers are making tripods with photographers in mind, and generally for photographers doing like landscapes and things like that with wide angle lenses, or maybe shorter telephoto lenses. And the guys that were using the really big 500s and 600s were probably doing some kind of a monopod or a big heavy duty tripod. So for lightweight tripods in the field, they were usually a compromise, and they usually fell apart fairly quickly. About 2002, 2003, 2004, somewhere in that neighborhood, I was at a bird festival, and at the booth next door to me was a company that had carbon fiber tripods, carbon fiber legs, and they were expensive. They were like almost triple the cost of the aluminum tripods that we had. We were using the Manfrotto aluminum tripods back then. The Swarovski one was made up for us by Manfrotto. So I put my Manfrotto tripod right next to the carbon fiber tripod, put the same exact scope on it, put them through there, cranked it up to 60 power, and did the boing test. I did it and just kind of wrapped it, boing, and watched the vibrations. The carbon fiber tripod dampened the vibrations on the boing test in 1/3 of the time that the aluminum did. I went, oh heck yes. This is what I need, because what's the worst thing in the world, especially when you got your scope all the way cranked up? Everything's shaking so much because of the wind or whatever. You're on the deck at a viewing platform, and people are walking on the deck, and everything's bouncing around like crazy. Oh my God, I want to have some vibration dampening. So carbon fiber dampens vibrations. It's lighter weight and it dampens vibrations. To me, that's worth the extra money. So right now, I mean, you can go online and find all kinds of carbon fiber legs. And the prices have come down dramatically, in those last 18, 20 years. So now you can buy them fairly reasonable. The Swarovski tripod that we have is actually made for us by Gizzo. Gizzo is a very, very good company out of Italy. They're actually owned by the same company that owns Manfrotto. One of the cool things about I have never been a big fan of the twist lock legs. I always liked flip lock, but the flip locks were always annoying because they would loosen up and you have to tighten them. And when you got grit and sand and stuff in them, they tended to lock up or sometimes even just break entirely, which was completely annoying. So when we, Swarovski Optik, change over to these Gitzo tripods, the first thing they said was they're going to be a twist lock leg. And I went, I'm not really a big fan of that. Okay, that was then, this is now. Gitzo has figured it out so that when you loosen this thing up, the rest of it doesn't loosen, so you can loosen and tighten all the different legs, all the different sections independently of each other. And the really cool thing is to go from fully locked to fully unlocked, all you have to do is quarter turn. That's it. Quarter turn and you're done. You don't have to go this way and then this way. So if that's it. And it doesn't matter whether it's hot or cold, whether you got grit and sand on here, it's really, really good. I'm not going to do it for right now, but you can also disassemble the leg. Well, actually, what the heck, I will. Undo this. If you get grit and sand in your deal, you can undo this. See if I can do this one-handed. I think I can. Yeah, so it pops right out. And you see there's this little plastic tab, or I don't know if it's plastic or whatever. There's a little tab that's on here. This pops off. So literally there are 3 pieces to this entire system. You have your slider, you have your leg, and you have your little tab. And the little legs got little indents on here. The tab fits over top of it and creates 2 little channels. You can see a little channel here up and down. Well, the cool thing is, and the genius that Gitzo did was on the inside of the leg, they molded a little bitty ridge so that when you stick this baby back in, you twist this around until the channel lines up with the ridge. This slides in, this locks in place. That's it. 3 pieces. You get grit and crud in here. You can take it all apart. You can clean it all off. You can lube it if you want, put it back together. Boom. I think that's brilliant. I totally love it. So, so that's it. I am now a twist lock leg aficionado, which I never was before. These old dogs can learn new tricks. There we go. As the little diagram down the bottom shows you, it's always good to have a tripod where you can adjust legs differences because we're not always viewing on level ground, especially if you ever been to Hawk Mountain, ever been hawk watching at Hawk Mountain, you're sitting on rocks. So it's nice to be able to adjust your legs independently of each other so you can get them nice and firm and have your scope set up. You always want to have the center column of the scope to be perpendicular, to be pointing straight at the center of the earth. That way your panning is smooth and you're less likely to have fallovers. People that say, oh, the lightweight scope's going to get blown over in the wind. No, it gets blown over in the wind because you set it up badly, so it's leaning terribly, and then the wind pushes it and away it goes. A properly set up scope, you probably are not going to have any problems with falling over and stuff like that. Okay, so another thing about tripods. So I'm going to put my big old dude on the little guy here, and this baby, you know, the BTX is heavy. So if I do this, unlock my head, it wants to flop. So balancing can be really tricky. This little Gitzo head actually does have a spring-loaded balancing counterbalance spring inside of it that does help. It'll help balance up. But personally, I really love a balancing rail. So you can now move your scope forward and back on the tripod head to get it to balance. And so right now, and boom, there we are, right there. Okay, so the head is completely unlocked, but this thing is now balanced. The rail is an accessory. Our rail fits all of our scopes. You can also go into photography world and find extended quick release plates and all that stuff. What we did with our tripod head, even though Gitzo's making it for us, is we set it up so that our foot is what's called Arca Swiss compatible. There's a little AS there. Arca Swiss is a photographic accessory company, and they designed this type of accessory. So our Arca Swiss foot goes into the Arca Swiss head nicely. Bang. You don't need that stupid quick release plate, which always loosens up when you don't want it to. But in this case, so we also make the rail, which is Arca-Swiss compatible, that slides on the head. So tripod heads, got a nice set of tripod legs. Tripod heads can be heavy, and we don't want heavy because we're already carrying around legs and a scope and all that stuff. So the urge is to buy a very lightweight little tripod head. And when you go to the photo side, you know, Gitzo, Benro, all these guys have, you know, mini heads. Mini heads are great for an SLR camera with a 50 millimeter lens or wide angle lens or something like that on there, but they're not designed to carry and support a big old scope, especially when it's cranking out 30, 40, 50, 60 power. It's just, that's not what they were there for. So get a decent head, get a decent size head. And let's see, did I do head on the next page? I forgot, Ben. Let's go to the next page. I think I did. There we go, tripod head. Get a decent head, something that will handle the weight. I would always recommend getting a fluid head. Fluid heads are usually made for video guys because they want to be able to pan nicely. Well, think of what we do. We scan with our scope a lot, so it's nice to be able to pan with it and not have it jump, 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 jump. The other cool thing about fluid, so what it is instead of locking completely solid, even though you have it locked down, you can still kind of force it. But if you back off just a little bit, it's a viscous fluid in there that allows you to move smoothly, but it also dampens vibrations. So one of the guys at one of the photo shows was talking about it for photography, and he said, don't ever completely crank down your fluid head controls to lock everything in place, because now you can't control vibrations. That's brilliant. So for scoping, I would absolutely say, you know, get a fluid head. It doesn't have to be a huge one. You know, you can get decent sized ones, but that'll give you the ability to pan nicely, smoothly. You can tighten it up, and if you get everything balanced, whether it's with a rail or whatever, you can then you don't have to tighten lock solid. You can just get it dampened, and then you've got less vibrations coming up into your view. So that's a totally cool thing. So behind me, and you see from the picture over on the side, this is what's called a gimbal head, and it's a big old heavy dude, no question about it. I'll get this thing out of the way here. Get out of the way. But I found out something that I really, really, really love about it, and let's see which. How are we going to do this? Where's my other scope go? Nope. Okay. Let me just pop this over here. Got to figure out where everything goes. Okay. So one of the things about a regular tripod is when you have your balance and then aim up or aim down, you've now changed the center of gravity of the system, and it tends to get way, way, way out of balance again. Here's the cool thing about a gimbal head. So I'm gonna balance this thing front and center, front and back, and actually with it on this setting, I'm pretty sure it's set up for my camera. So, okay, so now my camera is balanced, but when I go up, when I go down, it stays balanced. That is cool. And even for scoping, if you're up on a mountain scanning down, or if you're down in the valley scanning up, you don't want to have the scope going clunk on you and all that. I really, really, really love a gimbal head. Now, that being said, it's a heavy head. It adds size and weight. But boy, for me, for viewing, because I use scope a lot, as good as that little CTH head is, I don't ever use it. I use the gimbal 100% of the time. For me, it works fantastic. If it's too big and heavy for you, I understand that and get it. And the little head is great. It's nice and rugged, but just knowing what you're getting into. Okay, I'm talking a little too much, so let's jump into the next slide. I think we should be getting into photography, and we'll try and end this in digital photography. Okay, so since you can see through a spotting scope with your eye, doesn't matter which spotting scope it is, old Space Master, new Swarovski, doesn't matter. I could do photography through my old Space Master. I had an attachment for it, but that was 35 millimeter film, and the system wasn't all that great. And of course, you had to wait a week and a half to find out from Kodak whether you screwed up all your pictures or not. When digital photography came around, we were hand holding point and shoot cameras up to scope eyepieces, and that worked. Then we figured out that digital SLRs would work if you did the old 50mm lens, the old normal lens that saw the same scene as your eye did, because a spotting scope eyepiece is designed to have a human eye behind it. So when the camera lens emulates the human eye, hello, it works. Then, telephones got cameras in them, and all of a sudden we had smartphone photography, which is pretty cool stuff. You can just look through your scope and say, "Oh, I got to get a picture of that," and boom, you got your camera, you got your phone on there, and it's going to take pictures. It works. It's a little fiddly. It works. Smartphones create phone scoping. The image quality on any of these systems can be excellent, but there's always caveats, and most of it is the skill and the knowledge of the user has a lot to do with how good and how consistently you get good pictures. Like whooping crane taken from the skimmer boat down in Rockport. That's handheld from the boat we were doing the Christmas count. That's with the spotting scope. He was probably 80, 90 yards away. So in your 400mm lens, he would have been about maybe that big, because this is 1,000mm. Actually, 1,200mm was the effective focal length for this shot. Things like Costa Rica, first thing in the morning, our carry sticking his head out. We're actually using a flashlight to light this up, and I'm shooting through the scope in like a 1/5 of a second exposure. You can do that kind of stuff, but that's a photographer game now. So next slide, please. Costa Rica, the fiery-throated hummingbird. Next slide. That's in my backyard here in Corpus Christi, and yes, I did put the perch up, but green jays, like I said, I traded blue jays for green jays. So yeah, that's good. That's okay, Ben. So when a customer wants to do digital photography through a scope, first question I ask them is, first question is, are you a photographer? Do you know f-stops and shutter speeds and all the things that go into photography? And if you don't, that's fine. But I need to know your base knowledge so we can go from there. What subjects do you want to photograph? And with our company, it's either going to be birds or critters. How far away will the subjects be? If it's a bird feeder at 25 feet, that's cool. If it's an elk at 1,000 yards, that's a little more interesting. What are your light conditions? Bright sunny day is good. Hunters, they want to take pictures of game animals. It's usually early in the morning, late in the evening. The light is bad, makes it more challenging. What are your expectations for the image? Why are you doing this? Not just because my friend Fred has one of these and I want to get a better picture than him. Well, I guess that's an okay reason too. You want to beat Fred. For most birders, I want to take a picture of a bird to either show that I saw it, for like my eBird list, or I have no idea what this thing is, so can somebody please identify this for me? That's cool. Or I have a blog, I have a Facebook page, I have a Flickr account, and I like to show pretty pictures of birds. Whether it's my feeder, my backyard, when I go to Costa Rica, when I go to South Texas, go looking at birds at South Padre Island. Getting better quality up into, entering photo contests, you're expecting better quality. Submitting to a magazine, whether it's for photo spread or whether it's with an article or something like that. And ultimately, the ultimate test of really good bird photography is making big prints and trying to sell them. And it's funny because when I do photography events, I go to a lot of bird festivals, but I do a few nature photography events. And the first time I did it with one of our guys, normally at the bird festivals, we have a big TV monitor and I show you pictures, or I'm showing it to you on my iPhone or on my iPad or maybe on my iPhone. We went to a Kelby 1 event and we're exhibiting there, and we had the big TV monitor, but I also had the prints. And one of our birders that was helping me out, after the first 4 hours, he goes, "This is really weird. They don't even look at that TV monitor. They go right to the prints and they want to see the prints." And I said, yes, because that's what makes a difference to a photographer, is how good the print quality is. What can I see in a print? So depending on your needs and your expectations of that image, we can do it with this, because they'll look at these pictures, look at the scope, look back at me and go, how come we don't know about this? I'm carrying around a 500mm f4 lens and it weighs a ton, and that thing is smaller and lighter and is 1,000mm. Are you kidding me? No, I'm not kidding. It's just that our market is birding and hunting, and for us to get into the photography world, we'd have to come up with an entirely new ad campaign, a lot of money over a period of time to get that done. So I'm not going to even go there. So finally, are you a photographer? So next slide. And we're getting down to 5 minutes, so we're getting close. Yes, you can do flight shots with this, because what I basically tell anybody that's putting a camera on here, especially if it's an SLR, take off your bird watching hat, put on your photographer's hat. Think like a photographer. Think of what I need to do with my camera and my setup to get good shots. Yes, you can do flight shots with this. Just like a 500mm lens, I can do this with a 1000mm lens. I have to manually focus. Not a big deal, especially with the mirrorless camera with focus peaking. Works like a charm. One of my favorite pictures in the world is next. This is taken in my backyard. I really, really detest hummingbird shots taken with 17 strobes at a 1/10 millionth of a second exposure, so you can see everything, because this poor little hummingbird looks like he just got impaled by Audubon's needles. You know, this to me, this is a hummingbird shot. I love this picture. This was taken in my backyard, and it wasn't just one shot. I took a whole bunch of them to get the one I wanted, but you can do all kinds of stuff because it is now a photographic system. It's not a birding system. Next. I've used the DSLR cameras a long time. My Pentax took a lot of really great shots. I have become a complete devotee and advocate of the mirrorless cameras, because ultimately their function is the same. They take the light from the lens and expose it onto a sensor, but they do it with an electronic viewfinder that you can preview exposure, preview white balance, preview your focusing, preview all that stuff before you push the button, as opposed to pushing the button and having a chimp to look on the back screen to see if you screwed it up or not. Wonderful. Next. Phones. Phones are a blast. What do I do with my phone? It disappeared somewhere. Too many things around here. Oh, there it is. Okay, so phone on the scope. Any of the smartphones will work well. None of them work perfectly. The deal is you have to have an adapter. We don't have to, but you can hand hold the phone up to the eyepiece of the scope, but that's a huge pain in the butt. It's better to have an adapter that puts onto the eyepiece of the scope, the rubber eye cup, but you have to make sure that it's all perpendicular and square and centered and all that, which is still kind of fiddly. Once you get it set up, still images are great. Videos are unbelievable, just unbelievable. Some of the cool stuff you can do, especially with slow motion, because the iPhones now will do 120 frames a second or 240 frames a second, and with the magnification that you get on the scope, it's bathing birds are just endlessly fascinating. All that stuff. Just like with the SLRs, even with the phones, there's things you have to worry about. You have to worry about shake and balance, distances to the subjects, because heat shimmer will always kill image quality on a bright sunny day at distances of more than 100 feet. That's physics. You can't do anything about it. Getting a good scope, getting a good tripod, getting all that stuff. Okay, next slide. I think that should be our comparison slide. Oh no, there's my favorite. So that's Albert Egertstein. It is a snowy egret taken with my iPhone 6 Plus, and I have a poster of it somewhere. I couldn't find it before. It is incredibly sharp, and I show people that. I said, you will not believe that this was taken with a cell phone. And they go, no, I don't. I said, okay, here's the image. And they go, oh my God. So you can do really cool stuff with the cell phones, but you have to know how to use it. Next. So this was at Space Coast Bird Festival a few years ago. One is a cell phone shot, one is a DSLR taken from the exact same spot with the exact same scope and the exact same magnification. And if you really look closely at the images, next one, Barry, Ben, sorry. And next, looking really closely, you can see that there's a little bit of difference in the smoothness of the image and the contours and the colors. Yeah, click it again. Oops! Oh, it should have come up and said which one it was. So the one on the left is the SLR. The one on the right is the cell phone. So they both do really good jobs. But again, it's how well do you know your system and how well can you make it work. So it looks like we got about 3 minutes left. So the next shot is the next slide is see the unseen. That is the mantra of Swarovski Optik. The world belongs to those who can see beauty. Experience the moment, see the unseen, and we help you see it better. So questions, Ben?
Well, great. Thanks for all that info, Clay. That was amazing, all the amount of detail that you went through. Let's ask the audience for questions. Let me go ahead and take a moment to pull those out. And also just to say, we are running close to the hour, but we will take a few questions here. And if there's anything that we don't get to, feel free to email me, ben@bentbird.com, and we can carry on this conversation.
Yeah, he can kick it forward to me. And if any of you out there would like to have another program where we talk specifically about the photography aspects, because there are a lot of little things that we can go into, a lot of tips and tricks, I'd be more than happy to do that at a future date. So,
Ted,
the last thing is Land, Sea, and Sky in Houston is the official dealer for the official optics dealer for Victor Emmanuel Tours, and also Houston Audubon. They are offering a discount on Swarovski Optik products, and that's the code that Ben will send you after this deal. So we support Land, Sea, and Sky. They're great people, and hopefully, if you saw the light, pun intended, with the scope, go buy one. Okay, questions.
Ted asked if one were to upgrade from the older ATS scope to the modular ATX, do you have suggestions for what to do with the old scope? Is there a trade-in program or a donation?
Okay, so we, Swarovski Optik, never sell things directly to consumers, and we don't do trade-ins. You can talk to your dealers. Land, Sea, and Sky might be interested in trade-in, that's for sure. One of the cool things about our stuff is they hold their value very, very well. So you can get a 10-year-old scope, sell it on eBay, and probably sell it for exactly what you paid for it. Because where'd it go? So like our little 65, 10 years ago was about $1,800. Right now they're about $2,300. So you could certainly, with $2,300 brand new and one in decent shape, you could sell it for $1,500, $1,600, $1,700, same thing you paid for it back then, and sell it in a heartbeat. No, that's always a very good thing. One of the you didn't hear me say this, but if you're going to sell your scope, it might not be a bad idea to send it back to us for a cleaning check beforehand. Make sure everything is perfect. That way, it's also something you can add on to the sales thing. Just recently serviced by.
Mary has a question about the attachments for the phone to scope, and I think she means cell phone. And she also wonders, are there alternatives to the variable adapter?
Yes. So like the little, what do I do? I keep losing things. Oh, there it is. So like, this is my old iPhone 6 with the built for it adapter that Swarovski Optik made. Basically, you've got two choices with phone adapters. You've got the ones that are made for a specific phone model, or you've got the variable ones. With the case of the Swarovski, we did a really nice all metal one. It was $200. So if you bought a new scope, bought a new phone, you had to buy a new adapter, and it got crazy. So we came out with the variable one, which is a nice one. It's what did I do with it? I don't know where it went. It disappeared on me. Oh, there it is over there. We came out with the variable one, which works nicely, but it is still, you still have to set it up. There's a bunch of variable ones out there, and none of them are perfect. They're all tricky. So if you're going to get one, see what you can do. It's better to have a built for you adapter, built for your phone adapter than the variable one, unless you swap phones a lot. So for $200 on our variable, here it is. You get a new phone next year, this will still fit it, and this is big enough so it fits even the big old 11 Pro Max with a case on it. It still fits in there. So that's an advantage there, where you don't have to be taking cases on and off, because with these guys you have to take your case off before you put this on. So, and we can go in more in depth than that if we do another seminar.
Clay, Roy is saying that he couldn't see what you were showing. I could see it, so I'm not sure if there was a playback issue on our end or on Roy's end. So Roy, sorry if you're having trouble seeing that. I'll send you a link tomorrow when I post this to our YouTube channel, and everything should be bufferless, as it were. But let me take just a minute to let everybody know about our upcoming webinar, which will be on June the 3rd with Rafael Galvez. It's Migratory Birds Connect Us, the spectacular migration of raptors over the Florida Keys. There are inseparable lines connecting our favorite places in North America to a diversity of points across the hemispheres, drawn by the migration of birds. During the fall season, countless birds fly southward and leave our continent. Thousands of peregrine falcons from throughout the U.S. converge over the Florida Keys before crossing the straits toward South America. As many as 1,506 peregrines have been counted from the Keys in a single day. One peregrine alone may fly from the northeast over hundreds of protected areas and more than a dozen countries before reaching southern Chile, connecting a network of observers at several count sites. Join Rafael Galvez for a discussion about this spectacular migration of falcons and other raptors and the many other bird species that make the Florida Keys one of the top migration sites on the continent.
And if you haven't been to the Florida Keys Hawk Watch, it's a very cool one to go to. We were there one day, a day after they had a big movement of broadwing hawks, and the broadwing hawks went past Marathon all the way down to the end of Key West, decided they weren't going to go over the Caribbean, and they came back. So the day we had it, they actually had to have a negative broadwing count because they were heading back north, which was really funny.
Well, Clay, I'm going to have one more comment and a question before we end our broadcast today. Florian says, thank you so much for the presentation. Now he needs to save up his money to buy from Swarovski. But he didn't know all the differences, so he thanks you so much for the comparison of the different models.
Good.
And Linda says, when referencing the different weights of the different scopes, can you give a few representative numbers? I don't know if you know them off the top of your head, like the ounces or pounds of the 65, 85, and 115 millimeter.
Yeah. Okay. So the 65 is about a little more than 3.5 pounds. It's on our website, or if you go on Land, Sea, and Sky's website, they're going to have the details. So the 65 is about 3.5 pounds. If you put that 80 millimeter front end on there, where my 80 go? Well, there's my 80 there. We go to a little more than 4. If you go to the 95, you're at just about 5 pounds, and then the 115 adds another 1.75 pounds. So you're almost up to 7 pounds with the 115. The 115 is a beast. I've come to appreciate that. Now, again, I've carried big lenses and all that stuff, so to me it's not too much, but I noticed that it's bigger. But boy, the image quality of that thing is incredible. Well, we took it to the Sea Watch at La Jolla Cliffs in San Diego, and Stan Whalen's just lost his mind on how good it was. And Brian Sullivan up at Monterey at Point Pinos said the same thing, that there's nothing like this, nothing. So bigger is better.
Well, thank you so much, Clay, for the presentation today, and thanks everybody for tuning in for another event webinar. We hope to see you again in the future and hope you have a great day.